The violins were tuned to the exact temperature of money. Their notes floated over the terrace like perfume, light and expensive, designed to make you forget the sound of real breathing. I stood at the edge of the reception lawn, fingers tucked into the seams of my navy dress, and watched servers carry towers of sugared raspberries as if they were rare birds. The Hawthorne estate sprawled behind them in white stone and confidence. Somewhere upstairs, my son was laughing. The sound reached me like a tide. A hostess in a silver sash approached with the practiced smile of someone who's paid to make decisions feel like accidents. Place cards are by the topiaries, Ms. She paused, eyes slipping over my dress, taking the inventory people always take: age, fabric, posture, shoes. Miss Brooks. I told her thank you, and thanked the part of myself that has learned how to be underestimated without flinching. The topiary table was a hedge sculpted into the shape of a swan. White cards nested in its feathers like little laws. I searched the alphabet of strangers until I found mine, hand-lettered in a calligraphy so elegant it almost disguised the knife. Eleanor Brooks, the help. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the chandelier light, a reflection. The flourish on the H was so lovely, it begged you to forgive the word that followed it. The breath I took tasted like old coins. Then I heard it, the muffled, delighted gasp to my right, the kind that bubbles up when people discover they're cruel in the same way. Goodness, someone said softly, savoring the syllables. How honest. Isabella Hawthorne drifted into view like smoke, sleek, ivory, immaculate. The bride, my son's choice. She looked at the card, then at me, and gave a small shrug of symmetry, as if gravity itself agreed with her. We wanted to make sure everyone felt seen, she said. Her voice was a ribbon tied around a box filled with teeth. Behind her, Margaret Hawthorne, the mother of the bride, lifted delicate fingers to the string of pearls at her throat. She arranged her features into shock the way florists arrange sprays professionally. Isabella, darling, she murmured, loud enough for the nearest table to hear. Surely this is a mistake. Not at all, Isabella said. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. It's a theme. Transparency. A small circle formed, the way circles form around fires. A groomsman glanced, blinked, and looked away. A woman in emerald silk took a sip of champagne and pretended it burned. Another card nearby read Henry Page Caddy, and the guests around it giggled, relieved to be safe from the blade by 3 feet and a different last name. I picked up the white card and felt its weight. Paper tells you more than people think. This one was thick, expensive, certain. The ink had sunk deep. You couldn't blot it out with napkins and good intentions. Congratulations, I said, and my voice didn't break. I've had longer practice at steadiness than at youth. It's beautiful. I lifted the card for the light to catch it, as if admiring the craftsmanship, both the handwriting and the honesty. A few of them laughed nervous laughs. With no place to sit down, Isabella studied my face like it was a mirror she didn't trust. She was ravishing. Cruelty often dresses well. We're so glad you could make it, she said. Daniel was worried you might feel out of place. My son's name in her mouth was a thing I recognized and did not like, a jewel she wore to match the others. I pictured him as a boy at our kitchen table in our little house, his elbows sticky with orange juice, reading me the labels on cereal boxes as if they were spells. I kept my eyes on the card. I rarely feel out of place, I said. People can make a place anywhere, if they know how to look. Margaret's smile thinned. Eleanor, is it? We've set you at table 12, closest to the service doors, which I thought you might appreciate. It's breezier. She tipped her glass toward the white tent where staff moved like a soft machine. I do appreciate efficiency, I said, and set the place card gently on my purse. Careful, like placing a feather on a scale. Laughter rolled from the head table, where the photographer posed people with the precision of a jeweler. Daniel caught my eye. He looked happy. It's astonishing how happiness can make a face look like its own childhood. He lifted his hand in a small wave, and I found I could wave back. Love is stubborn work. It goes on doing its job even after management changes. Isabella leaned closer. I could smell her perfume, white florals, chill, the suggestion of winter in rooms that never feel it. We do admire hard workers in this family, she murmured. It's what keeps things tidy. The pause around that word was deliberate. A napkin folded to show you its clean edge. Then you'll love the staff, I said. They've rescued more evenings than most benefactors, I smiled. And they tend to tip better. A ripple, someone choked on a laugh. Margaret's pearls clicked like tiny bones. Isabella's eyes cooled. She recovered quickly. She was practiced. Enjoy the celebration, Eleanor. Tonight is about family. Family. I turned the word over like a coin that's passed through to many hands. I thought of the ring Daniel had slipped onto her finger under the gaze of those white roses climbing the arbor. I thought of teaching him to tie his shoes, the way he'd cried at 7 because he couldn't make the loops stay. Patience, I'd said then, touching the knot. Some things hold after you give them time to. He had taken that advice and applied it to a woman. Of course, I said, and smiled as if we were agreeing on the weather. I took my seat at table 12. The service doors exhaled a warm breath of rosemary and butter every time they swung, and the hum behind them was a comfort work in progress. Something real happening where no one was looking. The place settings glittered. A waiter placed a flute of champagne in front of me. Bubbles climbed like climbers who had no intention of stopping. Across the table, an old college friend of Daniel's cleared his throat and failed to meet my eyes. Rough labeling system, he muttered. I spared him the trouble of a response. Pity is a talent, and I didn't need to perform tonight. I smoothed the skirt of my dress and slid the card into my purse. Not hidden, just tucked away where I keep other useful things: stamps, mints, a photograph no one sees. I touched the edge of it once to set its place among my small arsenal. A string quartet surged into something triumphant. The MC lifted a microphone, and the crowd pivoted toward applause as if pulled by a single string. I stood. Where are you going? Asked the woman beside me, surprised, as if I'd stepped out of choreography. To powder my nose, I said lightly, and then, because I have always been a woman who prefers precision to euphemism, I added, and to make a call. I could feel Isabella's gaze on my back as I walked, the weight of it like a hand pressed flat against glass. I didn't hurry. I passed a mirror and caught my reflection, silver at the temples, a face that had learned the cost of choosing silence on time rather than on fear. I adjusted a stray hair. Outside the tent, the air was cooler. The lawn stretched toward the darkening trees. Fireflies began their patient punctuation. I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over a name that had been there a long time waiting. The orchestra crested. Applause followed like surf. I did not press the call yet. I have learned that the most generous thing you can give people is a little more rope. Sometimes they use it to pull themselves in from the river. Sometimes they don't. Behind me, laughter broke like glass. I looked back at the white tent, at the chandeliers and the dangerous cards arranged like blessings. Then I stepped farther into the evening, where the noise was softer and the words carried better. The name on my phone screen glowed like an ember: Robert Gray, my late husband's attorney, the man who knew the numbers hidden under my modest blouses and discount store smile. My thumb rested above the dial icon, but I didn't press. Not yet. You don't start a fire with your first match. You wait until the kindling is dry enough that one spark will do the job. That's how I had lived these last 6 months, quietly stacking twigs. It began the night Daniel brought Isabella home. He'd warned me in the way people warn you about the weather. She's different, Mom. You'll see. Different was an understatement. When Isabella Hawthorne walked into my little living room, I felt the temperature drop by 5 degrees. She wore winter white silk in late September, hair twisted back with diamond pins. My sofa sighed under her as though even the cushions recognized royalty. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, cataloging the framed pictures from CVS, the bookshelf Daniel built in high school shop class, the faded rug with threads coming loose in one corner. When she finally looked at me, her smile was sugar over frost. How quaint, she murmured, fingering the edge of a photo frame. It's refreshing to see someone who isn't obsessed with material things. The way she said refreshing was how people talk about a glass of water at a diner when they're used to champagne. Daniel beamed. He thought she meant it. I knew better. I made tea, the way I always did when my son brought anyone home. She didn't drink it, just let the cup cool untouched, her diamond bracelet glinting every time she adjusted the napkin. Your father was, she began, Harold Brooks. He passed 3 years ago. Her smile twitched. Oh, I'm so sorry. Her eyes darted to Daniel. She manages on her own? The question wasn't for me. It was for him. As though I weren't sitting to feed away. Yes, Daniel said quickly. She's strong, strong. That word clanged inside me. I had buried Harold, sold nothing, kept everything. But I smiled. I get by. And in that moment I understood her. Isabella Hawthorne was a woman who needed to believe she was marrying up, not sideways. To her, Daniel was the son of the help, and that was a story she intended to keep telling until the world believed it. The next weeks were an education in cruelty. When invitations for the engagement party arrived, mine was missing. Daniel called in a rush, embarrassed, swore it was an oversight. "I'll fix it, Mom," he said. The next day a card appeared in my mailbox postmarked late. An afterthought wrapped in heavy cream stationery. To the party. I stood in a hall, the size of a cathedral, chandeliers dripping crystal light onto marble floors. I wore my best navy skirt suit. One herald used to say made me look like I could argue with a senator and win. But Margaret Hawthorne greeted me with the smile of a woman inspecting a crack in her glassware. "You must be Eleanor, from Ohio?" She said it as though Ohio were a distant colony she'd only read about in tragedy reports. "Yes, born and raised." "How admirable," she cooed, drawing out the syllables. "Daniel has always been so grounded." Her friends tittered behind pearl-gloved hands. They introduced me around like a curiosity. "The widow, the housekeeper, the one who scraped by." I nodded, I smiled, I sipped champagne I didn't like, and I watched. Always watching. Suspense lives in details, in the little cruelties that slip by unnoticed. I noticed everything. The way Isabella's eyes narrowed when Daniel laughed with me too warmly. The way Margaret placed me at the far end of the banquet table, next to the coat rack, while she presided over the head with senators' wives. The way one guest whispered, "She looks like she shops at Macy's clearance," and the laughter rippled soft as lace. They thought I hadn't heard. They thought I was deaf, dumb, powerless. But I was patient. Harold used to say patience is just strategy in slower clothing. That night, back in my modest apartment, I pulled out his old ledgers. Hawthorne Holdings, Meridian Financial, their debts and acquisitions. The puzzle pieces were already there, waiting for someone who knew how to fit them together. And I had always been good at puzzles. The phone in my hand vibrated, dragging me back to the present, back to the wedding night where the place card in my purse whispered the help. Robert's name lit up again. My thumb hovered. I could call now, pull the trigger, watch the empire crack before dessert was served. But no, first, I wanted them to think they'd won. I wanted them laughing, relaxed, careless. That was the thing about cruelty, it makes people sloppy. So I pressed decline and slipped the phone back into my clutch. The night wasn't ready yet. Neither was I, but soon, very soon, the orchestra inside. The reception tent struck up something bright, a song meant for dancing, not thinking. I slipped back into the crowd, card tucked safely in my purse like a blade waiting for daylight. The Hawthorns were radiant in their laughter. Margaret at the head table, Isabella glowing beside Daniel, her hand resting lightly on his wrist as if she owned it. Guests drifted like perfume from cluster to cluster, trading jokes, sipping wealth. My son looked happy, a dangerous kind of happy, the kind that blinds a man to the sharp edges of what he loves. I let them think they'd won. I smiled when I caught someone staring. I nodded politely when Margaret waved me off with her pearls, clicking like castanets. But under the lace of conversation, my mind was busy. I remembered the engagement party, the night they'd first shown me exactly where I stood in their world. The Hawthorne estate had glittered that evening, chandeliers spilling light across marble floors polished until they looked wet. A hired quartet played Mozart in the corner while waiters glided with trays of oysters and caviar. It smelled of salt and money. Daniel had greeted me at the door, proud, nervous. "Mom, you look great," he said, kissing my cheek. He didn't notice Isabella's quick glance at my shoes, navy pumps, polished but sensible, not the kind that whispered custom made. Inside, Margaret floated toward me, glass of champagne raised like a blessing. "Eleanor," she sang, "from Ohio, correct?" The words hit the room like dropped silverware. Conversations faltered just long enough for people to register the geography. Ohio, as though she'd said from the swamps, or from the servants' entrance. "Yes," I answered. "Born and raised." "How quaint," she replied, lips curling. "We must celebrate our differences." She tucked her arm into mine with the practiced intimacy of a predator leading prey into a parlor. A tea dinner. I was placed at the far end of the table near the service doors, next to a man who spent the evening explaining to me how to pronounce Bordeaux. From my chair, I watched Isabella's friends clink glasses at the head, their laughter floating down the table like embers. When dessert came, miniature soufflés that collapsed if you looked at them too long. Isabella stood to make a toast. "To family," she said, glass lifted high, her voice carrying, to joining to legacies together, and to welcoming Daniel's mother, Eleanor Brooks, who taught him humility, hard work, and the value of thrift. The word thrift slid from her tongue like poison laced with honey. The table rippled with polite chuckles. Margaret dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, eyes sparkling with approval. I sipped my champagne and said nothing, but in silence, I was cataloging every insult, every smirk, every face that found the cruelty amusing. Later that night, while others danced under the chandeliers, I had wandered into the library. Oak shelves stretched to the ceiling, lined with volumes bound in leather and dust. The air smelled of cedar and old money. I traced the spines with a fingertip, letting the silence settle. That's when I noticed a folder left open on the desk, a careless slip in a house that prided itself on control. It was a quarterly report. Sterling Holdings. Their numbers were tidy on the surface, but I knew how to read between lines. Harold had taught me, look for the debts they hide, not the wealth they display. And there it was. Over-leveraged investments. Loans tied to property already strained. A portfolio balanced on glass. I closed the folder gently, careful to leave it exactly as I found it. But my heart was steady as stone. For the first time, I saw the crack in their empire. That was the night the plan began, back at the wedding. Margaret's laughter carried across the lawn. Isabella's perfect smile gleamed as she accepted congratulations, her white gown glowing like an expensive lie. I sat at table 12, fork idle beside my plate, and touched the edge of the place. Card in my purse. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was nothing more than the help. They had no idea the woman they mocked was already pulling threads they couldn't even see. I reached for my phone again. Robert's name stared up at me. This time, I let it ring once before pressing the call. Eleanor? His voice came, warm but alert. Not yet, I said softly, eyes fixed on Isabella across the room. But soon. I ended the call and smiled to myself. Sometimes suspense is a sharper weapon than action. And tonight, I wanted them to feel safe before the ground gave way. The music swelled inside the wedding tent, and laughter spilled like champagne. From table to table, I let the noise blur, my smile fixed, my heart calm. Robert's voice still echoed in my ear, Eleanor, but I had ended the call before he could press me. They thought I had no allies. They thought I had no weapons. But the truth was, I had been sharpening mine for months, and it started at the bridal shower. I hadn't been invited. Not at first. Daniel called me 2 nights before. His voice was hushed, the way children whisper when they already know they're betraying their mother. Mom, Isabella says the shower is just family friends, but I asked her to reconsider. She agreed to invite you. It's at the country club Saturday. Can you come? Of course, I could. I always could. When I arrived, the room was a glossy dream, long windows spilling sunlight onto linen draped tables, a tower of macarons shimmering in pastel colors. Women floated in designer dresses, their laughter delicate, rehearsed. I walked in wearing a navy dress from Nordstrom Rack. Simple, pressed, respectable. I carried a gift in silver paper, a crystal vase, nothing extravagant, but chosen with care. The looks began before I'd crossed the room. Eyebrows lifted, conversations faltered. Margaret's hand pressed against her pearls as if to anchor herself. Oh, Eleanor, she said, voice ringing. How wonderful you could come. Truly, truly. The word dropped like a coin in a wishing well, hollow and echoing. I placed my gift among the others. The table glittered with Tiffany boxes. Hermes scarves, lingerie wrapped in tissue so delicate it seemed sinful to touch. My vase looked like a stray sparrow in a cage of peacocks. When Isabella opened it, she held it up between 2 fingers as though it carried weight it did not deserve. How practical, she announced, her lips curving. Every bride needs something from Macy's. The laughter that followed was soft, cruel, expensive. The kind of laughter that feeds on other people's smallness. I smiled, always smiled, and sipped my champagne, though it tasted like tin. But while they laughed, I was listening. Wealthy women talk more than they realize, especially when they think you're beneath them. At that table, I heard them complain about unpaid invoices, about Charles Hawthorne's delays in securing new funding, about a tight quarter and strained liquidity. Words that meant little to them but everything to me. They didn't know I was fluent in that language. Harold had taught me to read balance sheets the way other people read novels. Every complaint was a breadcrumb. Every whispered sigh was a Page torn from their hidden book. As Isabella paraded through silk ribbons and boxes, I filed it all away. Hawthorne Holdings was under pressure. The cracks I'd seen in that library report weren't an illusion, they were widening. By the time the shower ended, I had more than humiliation. I had information. And information is heavier than gold. When I returned home that night, I didn't cry. I brewed coffee instead, strong and black, and spread Harold's ledgers across the kitchen table. I studied the threads that bound the Hawthorne fortune together: property loans, leveraged investments, business partnerships, fragile knots pretending to be chains. And then I made my first move, a small one, invisible. Through Robert, I acquired a sliver of stock in one of their subsidiaries. Just enough to give me eyes where they assumed no one was watching. It wasn't about power yet, it was about vision. To learn how the walls leaned before I decided which one to push. Back at the wedding, Isabella stood glowing under the chandeliers, her gown catching the light like a blade. Margaret leaned in to whisper something, and they both laughed, their eyes flicking briefly toward my table. I touched the edge of my purse where the name card rested. The help. If only they knew how much help I had already given them by staying quiet. If only they understood how dangerous silence can be. Soon they would. Very soon. The wedding day dawned cruelly beautiful, the kind of blue sky that looked painted, the kind of breeze that never mussed a rich woman's hair. If you didn't know better, you'd think heaven itself had arrived to the Hawthorne estate. I had chosen my dress carefully, navy silk, pressed, nothing that would outshine the bride. Nothing that would earn another whispered trying too hard. I wanted to disappear, to be a shadow in the background, unseen, underestimated. Daniel's face when he saw Isabella walking down the aisle was pure joy. That look, my son, lit from within, almost undid me. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe love softened steel. Maybe marriage polished cruelty into civility. But then Isabella's eyes slid to mine during the vows, and she smiled not at her groom, but at me. A smile cold enough to make champagne freeze. The ceremony ended with applause like thunder rolling across marble. Guests spilled into the gardens for the reception, where white roses climbed trellises and string quartets played under gilded tents. I found my seat at table 12, close to the swinging service doors, surrounded by Daniel's old college friends who shifted uncomfortably in their tuxedos. And there it was. The nameplate, Eleanor Brooks, the help. The words gleamed in ink so dark it might have been blood. I picked it up, smiled as though admiring calligraphy, and set it neatly on my purse. The laughter bubbled up from the head table, low at first. Then, swelling, Margaret gasped in mock horror. The performance of a woman who pretended shock but loved the scene. Isabella's smile sharpened, razor thin. Surely this is a mistake, Margaret said, pressing pearls against her throat. Not at all, Isabella purred. Honesty is important in family relationships, don't you think? Her eyes found mine across the tables. We wouldn't want anyone to get ideas above their station. The chuckles spread like a sickness. Forks paused mid-air, champagne glasses tilted. My son, my boy shifted in his chair, confusion clouding his face. He looked between us, lips parting, but no words came. I stood slowly. The laughter faltered just enough. You're right, I said, voice calm as steel. Honesty is very important. And then, without raising my voice, I smiled a smile that made Isabella tilt her head, just slightly, as if she'd heard something she couldn't place. I walked away. The estate library was cool and dark, lined with leather-bound volumes whose spines whispered of legacy. I closed the door softly behind me and pulled out my phone. Robert answered on the first ring. Eleanor? Yes. My voice was steady. It's time. There was a silence, the sound of a man adjusting his world. Are you certain? Once we pull the investments, do it, I said. All of it. Tonight. I walked to the window and looked out at the reception lawn where laughter still floated like ribbons in the air. Isabella raised a glass, radiant, basking in her triumph. She thought she had won. Activate the clauses on Sterling Holdings loans, I added. Accelerate every payment schedule. I want default notices sent before dawn. Robert exhaled, a sound of both awe and fear. This will ruin them, Eleanor. In 48 hours they'll learn what charity feels like. I cut in. Tell them the help sends her regards. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse beside the nameplate. For a moment I let myself breathe in the smell of cedar and dust, the weight of centuries of books that had cost more than most people's homes. The irony wasn't lost on me, plotting the fall of a dynasty inside the room they built to prove they would never fall. When I returned to the reception, I moved like a shadow. I kissed Daniel's cheek, congratulated the happy couple, even accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. Isabella leaned in, smug, her veil brushing my arm. "Leaving so early?" she asked sweetly. "But we haven't even cut the cake. I'm sure you'll manage without me," I replied. "You're very good at making do with less." Her laugh was brittle glass. "Oh, Eleanor, you're so funny." I smiled. "Yes, I am." Then I left her standing there, radiant and oblivious, as the walls of her family's fortune began to crack, walls she didn't even know were crumbling. The sun rose on Sunday with cruel efficiency. Not even empires are safe from daylight. I sat on my apartment balcony with a chipped mug of coffee, watching sparrows pick crumbs from the railing. My little world, quiet, unassuming, modest, hummed as if nothing had changed. But in the Hawthorne household, phones were already shrieking, inboxes filling with words like default, foreclosure, termination. At 8:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Mom," his voice cracked with confusion. "I just got the strangest call from Isabella. She's crying about some kind of financial emergency. Her father's saying something about loans, defaults. Lawyers are calling. Do you know anything about this?" I sipped my coffee, watching the steam curl. "How would I know anything about their financial affairs, sweetheart? I'm just the help, remember?" "Mom, please. This isn't the time for jokes. Isabella's parents are panicking. They're saying the estate, they might lose everything." "Are they?" I said softly. "Or have they just been living like they're untouchable?" Silence. My son was a good man, but not yet old enough to see how the world really worked. He had always believed appearances, and appearances had been the Hawthorns' greatest disguise. By noon, the second call came, this time from Margaret herself. "Eleanor," she said, her voice brittle and desperate, "we need to talk." I let her desperation hang in the air before answering. "Of course, I always have time for family." The meeting was arranged for Monday, but Isabella couldn't wait. At exactly 1 o'clock that afternoon, she appeared at Marlowe's Diner on 5th Street, a place where the vinyl booth sagged and the smell of fried onions clung to the curtains. She looked nothing like the glowing bride from the night before. Her hair was unpinned, her makeup streaked, her eyes red from crying. She looked, for the first time, human. "Thank you for meeting me," she whispered, sliding into the booth across from me. Her hands shook against the sticky menu. "Of course," I said lightly. "I always have time for family." The waitress, Dolores' tired eyes, apron stained with coffee, shuffled over. "Special today's meatloaf," she said. Isabella flinched at the word special, as if it mocked her. "I don't know what to order," Isabella confessed. I don't eat at places like this." "The meatloaf is excellent," I said. "And affordable. I imagine that's important to you now." Her cheeks flushed. She nodded. When Dolores walked away, Isabella leaned forward, desperation in her voice. "My father might lose his job. The house, the banks threatening foreclosure. We don't understand how this happened so fast. One day everything was fine, and the next it's collapsing. These things don't happen overnight," I said gently. "They build slowly. People ignore the cracks until one day the whole wall gives way." Her lip trembled. "Can you help us?" "Help you?" I stirred sugar into my coffee. "I'm just the help, remember?" Her eyes flooded with tears. "I was wrong to write that. It was cruel. I don't know why I did it. Please, Eleanor, if there's anything you can do, I'll do anything. Anything." The most dangerous word a desperate woman can say. I reached into my purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "Then here are my conditions." Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. I watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief, then horror. "You want me to work as a cleaning lady, not just any cleaning lady. You'll work for Sunshine Cleaning Service. I worked there once, after Harold died. Mrs. Patterson will teach you what honest work feels like." "I've never cleaned anything in my life," Isabella whispered. "Then it's time you learn. Education is very important." She swallowed. "And this volunteer work? At the homeless shelter, every Saturday, serving meals, scrubbing toilets, doing whatever they need. For 1 year. After all, your mother's charities claim to support it. Time to see what those grants really look like." Her voice cracked. "And the apartment? You want me to live in a studio? Here? Until you can afford something better on a cleaning lady's salary," I said. "It's not so bad. I live there myself." Her tears slipped free, trailing black lines through her makeup. If I agree to all this, she whispered, you'll help my family? I'll make some calls, see what can be done, maybe even put in a good word for your father at Meridian Financial. But I paused, letting the suspense hang. Charity is never free. There are always conditions. She pressed the paper to her chest. For the first time since I'd known her, Isabella Hawthorne looked stripped of her armor. I'll do it, she whispered. All of it. I smiled, sipping my coffee. Good. Then perhaps you'll learn that sometimes the best way to climb is to start on your knees. Winter had given way to spring when I saw Isabella again. Not the Isabella who had smirked over Tiffany boxes or smiled while humiliating me at her wedding. No, the woman who stood mopping the marble floors of Meridian Financial's lobby was smaller, leaner, stripped of vanity like bark peeled from a tree. She wore a blue uniform, the name Sunshine Cleaning Service embroidered above her breast pocket. Her once perfect manicure was gone, her fingers red and rough, but there was something else in her eyes now, not pride exactly, but something steadier. Humility. When she spotted me in the glass reflection, she straightened, flushed, then wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. Mrs. Brooks, she said softly, I didn't expect to see you here. I had a board meeting upstairs, I replied. Thought I'd check in. She bent down, wringing out the mop with practiced hands. It's hard work, but I'm learning. Did you know I'm actually good with my hands? Mrs. Patterson says I have a talent for detail work. I smiled. I'm not surprised. You've always had an eye for perfection. You just needed to apply it to something meaningful. Her face lit a spark I had never seen before. Not the brittle glow of wealth, but the warmth of effort. And the shelter? I asked. Her smile widened, genuine. There's a little girl there, Maria. She teaches me Spanish while I help her with homework. I didn't realize how much I could learn from people I used to ignore. I studied her face. She meant it. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something rarer, understanding. A week later, I invited her to my apartment. The same modest space where my son had eaten peanut butter sandwiches, where Harold's picture still sat on the counter. Isabella walked through the door without the sneer she once wore. She looked around, really looked, as though seeing value where she once saw shame. Sit, I said. I have something for you. From my purse, I pulled a sealed envelope and slid it across the table. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The words blurred her vision. Meridian Financial appointment of Richard Hawthorne to Senior Vice President of Acquisitions. Her lips parted. My father, he got the promotion? But how? Because I said he would, I answered. And when I make promises, Isabella, I keep them. Tears welled. She pressed the paper to her chest. Why? After everything I did to you, why would you help us? Because, I said, leaning forward, you passed the real test. Not the one you failed with that nameplate. The test of change. You chose to bend instead of break. That is rarer than wealth. Later, as we walked, she asked the question she'd avoided for months. Who are you really? I stopped, the spring breeze tugging at my coat. I'm Eleanor Brooks, Harold's widow, the woman who cleaned houses when I had to, and the woman who inherited his empire when he passed. I control companies your family depends on. I own the banks that threaten foreclosure. I hold the majority stake in Meridian itself. Her breath caught. You own all of it? Yes. And I lived simply so no one would know. I needed to be loved for who I am, not what I own. Money changes people, Isabella, but character shows when the money disappears. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. 6 months later, at the homeless shelter, I saw Isabella again. She ladled soup, her sleeves rolled, her face damp with sweat. When a child tugged her sleeve, she bent without hesitation, listening, laughing. She caught my eye across the room, and for the first time, she didn't look away. You were right, she said later, outside in the fading light. Charity isn't about money. It's about people, about respect. She hesitated, her voice breaking. I was wrong about everything, about you, about what matters. I touched her shoulder. And now you know, true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you lift when they've fallen. She smiled, tears shimmering. At my wedding, I called you the help. Yes, I said softly. And now, her voice was steady. Now I know. You were the one helping me all along. When I left, I looked back once. Isabella was still there, apron tied, hair loose, listening as Maria recited her multiplication tables. I smiled. The Hawthorns had learned what real charity looked like, and I had learned that sometimes the sharpest revenge is not destruction but transformation, because to strip someone down until they discover the person they were meant to be, that is power. That is legacy. That is mine.